Hi, Lake Grove. Welcome to today's devotional from the Reservoir. We are still looking at how Jesus taught us how to pray and walking our way through the Lord's Prayer. For today, the phrase we're focusing on is lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The scripture passage they've paired this with comes from Matthew 18, verses 1 through 7. And this is the scripture passage where you will remember that Jesus, talking to his disciples, asks and answers the question, who is the greatest in the kingdom? And to answer that question, he will invite a child into the center of them, and he will say, truly I tell you, unless you become like a little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever takes the humble place, becoming like a child, is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And then he'll continue on, and this is really quite sharp. The last two verses that we have here in 6 and 7, where Jesus will say, if anyone causes one of these little ones to suffer, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were drowned in the depths of the sea. That is a hard word. Isn't it interesting that they've paired this passage with this line, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil? I see one reason, and that they highlighted in the scripture in the little reflection they gave there, that this is a humble prayer, even a childlike prayer that says, Lord, would you keep us from bad things happening? Protect us. Keep us out of trouble. Save us from everything bad. I want to point out, I think, one more thing that's relevant to us in this. In those last two verses, do we not get such a clear picture of evil, and of evil that we do not want to be a part of? How devastating. We know this viscerally. How awful it is when a child is harmed, misled, mistreated, abused, neglected. We know this. And so I want to take that as a little bit of a springboard into our prayer today, because does something awful happen? Does evil awful happen just out of the blue and sudden? No, the reality is that you and I have to reckon that we live in a world of evil and that it can be both within us as well as out in the surrounding world. And so, yes, this is a very humble prayer. Lead us not into temptation. But it's also asking us to be very aware. I'm really thankful to the theologian N.T. Wright for some reflections that he had on this line of the prayer. And I think he very rightly said, there are a few ways that we respond to evil around us, right? And one of them is to minimize it and say, oh no, it's not really bad. This can be very tempting, and I think easy for us to do, especially if our life seems pretty, safe, maybe protected, guarded. And if there's any question maybe of if there's forces of evil or things like that, we may not see a relevance or a reality of that. And so we minimize it and go, oh no, there's not really bad forces out there. There's not things like that happen. That would be sticking our head in the sand. And friends, we could take one look at the headlines and know that that's not true. Two, though, we could take one look at the headlines. I feel like I just said headstands. I meant headlines. We could take one look at the headlines and then just fall all the way in and be overcome and overwhelmed by the evil that we see around us. And so there's one way we could go too far and we could say, it's nothing like that is happening. Or overwhelmed, we have no power to do anything about it. Or, and a pushback against that, there's a third thing that we could do. We could try to superhero our way out. We see the evil in the world, we're going to be the superhero that responds. Yes. None of those are what Jesus chose to do. And here, N.T. Wright also said that this way that we've translated temptation here is more accurately translated testing. Lord, save us from the time of testing. Deliver us from evil. Jesus' whole life, in a sense, was lived here. A time of testing, and he was delivered from evil. Do you remember right after his baptism when he comes up out of the water and he hears those wonderful words, "This is my beloved Son, with him I am well pleased." And what's the very next thing? It says the Spirit drove him into the wilderness where he was tempted and not overcome. That brings tears to my eyes because that's the gift and the promise through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus that can happen for us. So we don't minimize evil. We don't wallow in evil. What we say is, Lord, I'm going to follow your way. Through the power of Christ, what we are going to do is walk in this world and say we have a healthy recognition that there is evil, and it can happen within us in the smallest little choices that would end up in a terrible thing to the forces all around us that we see so clearly. What we're going to do is say, you know what? We're going to face life with our eyes wide open and submit everything to the power and the control of God working through us to be able to meet those forces head on. And so what that says is you are walking in your life, and don't we know this? We walk both in joy and pain, in grief and hope, in sin and forgiveness, in loss and redemption. Do you see the meeting point? This is, Lord, lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from evil. Because we're going to walk these paths through our life, and the promise is we cannot be overcome. God has overcome the world. So we just file right in and right behind Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And we walk through our life knowing he is with us, able to see the evil that is in the world, in us and all around us, and to respond to it with power, agency, grace, healing, forgiveness, restoration. May these words of this prayer be so deeply within you. The Lord will never let you go. Never. Bless you, dear friends.